Okay, let's continue with Matthew. This section begins by describing the believer of the prophetic word and what motivates him. Light and salt are parallel figures for the preserving and illuminating truth of Messiah Jesus. Good works in verse 16 are not ultimately just being nice, giving to the poor, being merciful, but proclaiming the gospel, giving actual light and salt to the world in the form of messianic truth, because that is what the gospel is. All other virtues are inferred to be of this truth, not the truth itself. And that is the subject of this section of Matthew and the Sermon on the Mount. Verses 17 through 18. Do not think I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law until all is accomplished. A much debated expression. I have no idea why, but it is. And we have to meditate on this. It does not seem that Jesus abolishes the law. He fulfills it. But what does that mean? Does this only mean that Jesus was morally perfect and sinless? That he fulfilled the law and by faith we are accounted as its fulfillers? Or is something missing in how we understand this word fulfill? Now, when we go down this track, it's very interesting. In reading the Gospels, it's never stated or demonstrated by Jesus in what ways he perfectly fulfilled the law of Moses in the way the Pharisees understood it, or as we teach it and understand it. It's stated that he gave alms to the poor with perfect precision? That he prayed in a certain way and a certain number of times per day? That he wore the phylacteries rightly or tithed garden herbs with legal exactness? That he purified himself before every meal or kept every halakhic boundary in the tradition that the tradition required? Now, the gospel witness seems conspicuously silent on these markers of what they considered righteousness. In fact, we see Jesus acting against the plain notions of the law as the Pharisees received it, or how we understand it: not washing before meals, picking grain on the Sabbath, healing on the Sabbath. And this silence is not incidental. We need to sit with it. The disciples were not idle men. They were advocates. They had every reason, every motivation to build the strongest possible case for Jesus. If this sinless moral perfection under the Mosaic Code were the heart of his qualifications as Messiah and Savior, they would have built that case. They would have documented it with the same care Matthew gives to the prophetic citations. We would have a gospel of legal compliance. Instead, we get a gospel of fulfillment. And the two are not the same thing. We do not see the disciples trying to prove that Jesus kept the Sabbath without violation. There is no pointed demonstration that he observed the holy days in full, no accounting of his almsgiving, no witness to confirm he never defrauded anyone, never spoke a false word in a commercial transaction, never failed a single halakhic obligation across 33 years of life. The disciples show us that Jesus did not commit adultery, theft, murder, but these are incidental, not programmatic. They are not making a case for law keeping. These things are simply not the record. And yet we say Jesus was sinless. We confess it with full confidence. We build entire systems of imputed righteousness on it. The idea that his perfect law keeping is credited to our account precisely because we have failed to keep it ourselves. But we should ask the question honestly. Is that the sinlessness being imputed? Is that the kind on offer here? Because if his moral perfection under the 613, or the 10 for that matter, were the substance of what is credited to us, the apostles would have documented it. The silence of the record is its own witness. What the record does document ruthlessly, structurally, from the first verse of Matthew to the last line of Revelation, is that Jesus fulfilled what was put on record about him in advance. The prophetic oracles, the prior testimony of the Father through the prophets concerning his Son. That is what the apostles proved. That is what they staked their lives on. The sinlessness of Jesus they were concerned with was not a sinlessness of behavioral compliance, but of messianic fidelity. His obedience to his end as the word of the Father. His total conformity to the messianic mantle foretold across centuries by the prior witness. This is a transcendent virtue, and the distinction matters absolutely. Any mortal man could, in theory, or on reputation or report, keep the 613 mitzvot without external failure, or the 10 for that matter, become a model of legal observance, execute every halakhic requirement across a lifetime, and leave no visible breach in the record. That kind of sinlessness is humanly conceivable, even if practically unattained. It is of the same order as human achievement. Elevated, yes, but not transcendent. It belongs to the category of things mortal effort might theoretically reach. But it is impossible for any mortal man to take upon himself the messianic mantle foretold in the scriptures. That mantle is not earned, it is revealed. No amount of obedience to the Mosaic code could constitute someone as the fulfillment of Psalms 22 or Isaiah 53, or of the one foretold in Micah 5:2, who was to come from Bethlehem and whose going forth are from eternity. These are not legal achievements. They are not things you do by compliance. They are things you either are or are not. And only one person in human history is. The prophetic fit between what was inscribed centuries earlier and what Jesus was and did is not the product of human effort at all. Not conceivably, in any sense. It is the product of a transcendent God acting in history in a way that is, by its nature, incapable of being self-generated or self-applied. This is why the sinlessness that is imputed to us in faith is not the sinlessness of a man who kept the law without fault. It is the sinlessness of the one who is from eternity the only adequate object of the prophetic word, who did not merely obey the law, and of course he did, and he did perfectly, but became what the law was pointing at. That is the point. That's the essence of the law. His obedience was an obedience to the Father's word concerning him, a perfect and total conformity to the announced testimony, such that the prophetic record and the historical person are found to be in complete and verifiable agreement. That is the transcendent virtue. That is the righteousness that belongs to another order entirely, because the word to which he was obedient is a transcendent word, demonstrated as such. The word of a transcendent God fulfilled. And the demonstration of its truth is, by definition, something no human agency produces or controls. And we are imputed that righteousness specifically because we believe it, not tangentially, not partially, not as one article among several that we hold loosely, wholly in faith. We receive it as the recognition that the prophetic fit between the prior witness and the person of Jesus is a supernatural disclosure, not a human conclusion. That what the prophets wrote and what history produced cannot be explained on merely natural terms. That the one who fulfills that record is not merely a moral exemplar, but the revealed object of all that the law and the prophets were pointing toward. To believe that wholly is to receive the only righteousness that surpasses anything the scribes and Pharisees could produce. Not because it is more rigorous, but because it belongs to a different order entirely. They were measuring by their own performance. This is receiving what God announced and demonstrated. Now look, you cannot separate the sinlessness from who the sinlessness belongs to and what it consists of. Separate the imputed righteousness from the messianic identity, and you have a moral achievement on loan. Impressive, perhaps, but still of the same kind of human effort, only better executed. Keep them together, and you have a person, the one the document trail names, the one the prior witness certifies, the one the prophets were writing toward without knowing his name. That is a righteousness that surpasses the scribes and the Pharisees, not a better version of their project. The end of it. Now, Jesus does this to show that Pharisaic morality, external, performative, and codified, has been superseded by another law, one which is of the Spirit, the faith, written not on tablets of stone, but on the hearts of those who believe. And I'm throwing up here all the citations so that you can see them, because it is very, very well attested. What the Gospels do prove over and over is that Jesus perfectly fulfilled the oracles of the Father that had given through the prophets concerning Christ, both Christ and his word constituting the end of the law, Romans 10:4. For you cannot have the one without the other, John 1:1. Matthew and all the New Testament writers were not intent on giving examples of Christ's fulfillment of the law, except through countless quotations and allusions to the messianic oracles. Over and over and over, we see this as the real command of the Father. Not now a mere device of pedagogy, but for spiritual adults. He did not come to prove that a man can keep the halakhic tradition without fault, or the 10 for that matter, but that the word of God, spoken through the prophets, cannot fail. He fulfilled the law as prophecy, not as tradition, not as pedagogy. The distinction is crucial. It is theoretically possible for a mortal man to keep the 613 mitzvot, or the 10, without external failure, to become a model of legal observance. But it is impossible for any mortal man to take upon himself the messianic mantle foretold in the scriptures. That mantle is not earned, it is revealed. And it is precisely this revelation that Jesus alone fulfills, not by conforming to human interpretations of righteousness, but by embodying the very purpose for which the law and the prophets were given, to testify beforehand to the sufferings of Christ and the glories that would follow, 1 Peter 1:11. Now, Schweitzer, in his commentary, correctly states the argued problem, but offers no solution to it, as the church does universally. Accomplished or fulfilled for Schweitzer means it has come true, what the prophets have announced. And that is so true. The fullness intended but not attained. But he then talks around it. We know that doing something is at the heart of the law's obedience. But what exactly did Jesus do to fulfill it, if not in moral perfection as we understand it, is the question. Is it his baptism? Is it his good works? Now, Michael Green correctly says this: Jesus looks for the inner disposition as well as the outer action for fulfillment of the law. But he still can't say what motivates this inner disposition, which is the Spirit, not the letter of the law. And it's very strange. Why? Why can't they say it? The answer is on our lips, but we can't utter it. The law refers to messianic prefigurement meant to teach his coming, Galatians 3:24 through 27. The law is fulfilled only in that it is fulfilled by Messiah, a feat impossible for ourselves except with respect to a resulting end of our romance with the world and a turn to God from the heart. The law is unfulfilled revelation, but Jesus brings in fulfilled revelation, thereby accomplishing the essential law, which is prophetic, and making the unfulfilled law absorbed into the new, showing and proving, not only telling and hoping, for God to show himself again and finally come back to us. This is why a morality of following legal codes or any action by the body was never intended to be supremely demonstrative by us of God's righteousness. These are at best symbols, not significations, of the spiritual substances that demand outer representational forms. These outward expressions are nothing if not imprecise and cursory. They can easily be faked, but what the Spirit does and what it is are interchangeable. They are what they are and can never be artificial or inauthentic attesters of one's core, because it is our core. What motivates that which is righteous is the same thing which God is: unique, unduplicable by man, transcendent, objective, exclusive, and sovereign, which is by definition the messianic revelation as both a person and the Word. Now, verse 20. Therefore, since the righteousness of the Pharisees is believed by them to be a product of the behavioral performance of the commands of the law as an end in itself, but Jesus and his fulfilled commands of the Father are an end of the law for righteousness, Romans 10:4, belief in the fulfilled messianic prophecy of Jesus is the righteousness that surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, without which you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. The law is a mere teacher of a coming single point of demonstration of the reality and nature of God, not its master.